All right. So we've got a few hours together today. So this morning we'll be having a discussion about the benefits of meditation. And I'm just going to be speaking about my own subjective experience. I'm not going to be talking about anything that I've read in a book or, any intellectual sort of thing. I'm just going to be speaking about the ways in which I personally have benefited from meditation, keeping in mind that the Buddha said that there's one path, essentially. And if we practice in the same way, then we can expectation is the wrong word, but similar kind of results. It's all subjective, of course, and we're all on our own unique path through the cosmos. But if we practice in the same way, we can start to gain some quite profound and transformative insight and wisdom into our own lives, which we can use for the purpose of our spiritual growth and development, which is relevant to each of us as individuals on our own path. So this afternoon also we have some time for a Q&A. So I'll try to keep the talk to around about 2 hours today. So there's going to be a lot of things that are left unsaid. I'm not going to be able to touch on everything. There's going to be stones that are left unturned, of course. So this afternoon we have around about 2 hours for a Q&A. So I will save questions for then. If there's anything you'd like me to elaborate upon or anything that I didn't touch upon, we can talk about anything. Now, I don't know all of the answers. I only have my own experience. I'm not fully enlightened. I've been a monk for just over almost 3.5 years. So I'll do my best to answer some questions, but there may be some things that I just don't know. So don't hate me for that. All right, so the benefits of meditation. So firstly, I just wanted to touch on the habit, cultivating the habit of meditation. Because anybody who's interested in meditation, unfortunately, you've got no chance of gaining any benefit from meditation if you don't have a strong habit. So this is first and foremost, and this is a non-negotiable kind of thing. If you are serious about meditation, then the first thing that you should be aiming for is building a strong and sustainable habit of meditation in your lives. So it needs to be something that we do consistently every single day. And unfortunately, we can't. There's no way around it. There's no way over it. There's no way under it. This is just something that we have to keep ourselves accountable to. Because meditation is something that it builds up. And if we're not practicing in the right way, if we don't have a strong habit, then we don't give our practice, the meditation, the opportunity that it needs to build in the right way. So first and foremost, it's the habit itself. We want to make sure that if we are very intent on developing ourselves on the spiritual path, that we're practicing every single day. So practicing meditation every single day, just as important as brushing your teeth every single day, having a shower every single day. Because if you don't brush your teeth every single day, then no one's going to want to kiss you. No, your breath is going to smell. And if you don't have a shower every single day, then your body's going to smell. And if you don't practice meditation every single day, then your mind is going to start to smell. The defilements are going to take root. And this gives rise to mental illness, mental disease, depression, anxiety, fear, uncertainty, doubt, mental illness. It all comes from an undisciplined or an impure mind, which is full of defilements. And we've all got defilements. There's no judgment there, of course, but we're all full of ignorance. There's so many things that we don't know. There's so many ways in which we're getting in our own way, which we can't fully comprehend because we're stuck right in it, of course. So the mind is full of toxins. And these toxins, they build up and they just wreak havoc. They cause chaos in our lives. They cause disease. They cause debilitating problems in our lives. And meditation is the tool that we can use to clean the mind. Just like having a shower is the tool that we can use to clean the body. And if we're not showering the mind every day, then these toxins, they build up and they build up very, very quickly. And when we become accomplished in meditation, we've got a strong habit, we're practicing every single day, we can start to see the way in which meditation is actually purifying the mind. Meditation is actually clearing the mind. Meditation is helping us to transcend these defilements or liberate ourselves from these defilements. We can start to heal ourselves. We can start to grow. We can start to shift. We can start to evolve. All of those wonderful things that everybody is looking for in their lives. The spiritual development. It starts to happen. It just happens. So to allow it to happen, to give it the chance that it needs, we just have to keep ourselves accountable, and that's it. And it's going to require that we, crack the whip on ourselves a little bit, but not too hard. So to create a strong habit in meditation, it doesn't need to be 10 hours a day of meditation. We just want to start small and sustainable. So 5 minutes a day, that's it. Is there anyone who doesn't have 5 minutes a day for meditation? I dare you to raise your hand. Yeah, seriously, it's easy. It's so easy. You can't fail. And we want to set the goal as small as we possibly can to remove the possibility of failure. Because if we set the expectations too high, then there's a really good chance that we can fail. Because a lot of us are time poor. A lot of us are energy poor. And a lot of us will get in our own way. We'll be our own worst enemy by setting unreasonable and unrealistic expectations for ourselves. I'm going to meditate for an hour every day. Yes, that's a noble cause, and it's a great goal to set. It's great to have this in mind that we want to meditate for as long as we possibly can. But how realistic is it in the world in which we live? Most of us, we may not have an hour of spare time a day because of all of our accountabilities, because we're stretched so thin across so many other things. Now, most days you may have an hour, or you may have half an hour, but on the one day that you don't, and on the one day that you can't meet that expectation, your integrity takes a hit, a big hit. You lose your faith in yourself. You lose your faith that you can do what you say that you're going to do for, whatever reason you can't do what you say that you're going to do. On that one day, you just don't have the time. And then all of a sudden you start beating yourself up. You've set the expectation too high, and it's your own expectation that you've created for yourself. And because of your failure to meet that expectation, you start to lose your sense of integrity. And it's a very slippery slope, very difficult to recover from that point. When you fail or call it a failure and then associate meditation with that failure, meditation starts to become the problem, right? So we beat ourselves up and we start to say, oh no, I can't meditate anymore. I don't want to meditate. That makes me feel bad about myself. I just can't do it. It's all about managing expectations. This is the path. Just letting go of any expectations and setting reasonable and realistic goals for ourselves to ensure that we can't fail, that we build ourselves strong, we're building ourselves in the right way, and we make sure that the process is sustainable. Because if it's not sustainable, then it's not sustainable. And we don't necessarily know what our parameters are when we're starting with this practice. It's like being a baby. We're being born into this brand new world and using this brand new body. We've got no idea how it works. So we want to start just very, very small. And many of you might say, well, 5 minutes it's kindergarten. Anyone can do that. And that's the point. We want it to be easy as possible. If we make things difficult for ourselves, then we're setting ourselves up for failure. So we just want to remove all of the... we want to just create a fail-safe, essentially. So just 5 minutes and that's it. That's the goal. But you can always do more than 5 minutes if you want to. It's not to say that you have to do just 5 minutes and then you can't do any more meditation. You can do an hour, you can do as much as you want. But we're only aiming for that 5 minutes. And this way we can check that box every single day and build our sense of I can. We want to build the I can mentality rather than the I can't. It's oftentimes the I can't mentality which is the problem, which is the reason why we fall short of our expectations, why we fail. We don't have any faith in ourselves. We have no confidence. So this is a great way to start building the confidence that we need to become successful in anything that we put our minds to in our lives. Meditation, blah, 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 whatever it is. Just bite-sized, achievable goals. So, and then we want to just get sustainable. We want to get to the point where we become autonomous in our practice, completely autonomous. To start with, building the habit, it's going to take effort. It's going to be quite difficult. You're going to have to work and it's going to feel like, a bit challenging, of course. But it gets to the point over time when you've been practicing long enough, you've built the habit quite strong, it becomes autonomous. Now, science or whatever sometimes says that it takes 3 weeks to build a habit. Or 21 days or something like that. So I'm not sure if that's the case for everybody, but it doesn't take too long to integrate this habit into your life in a sustainable way to the point where it becomes second nature. So don't be afraid to just push yourself until you get there, until you get momentum, until you get the ball rolling, and eventually it starts to become effortless. I remember when I was a little kid, my mum couldn't get me to brush my teeth. She couldn't get me to get in the shower. It's like, oh no, I didn't want to. It was a tantrum. It was a battle every single time, and I just didn't want to do it. And it got to the point where I'd been doing it every day. You do it long enough, and now it's second nature. You just do it because you know that it's good for you. Same with meditation. It's almost like you integrate it into the very fabric of your identity, I suppose. And that's kind of the way that we want it to be. We want it to become a part of us, like an extension of ourselves, just like your arm, your spiritual arm, or something like that. So, and so that to the point where we're doing it every single day, without question, without argument, without fail. And this is the first major milestone for a meditator. It's just getting to the point where you become autonomous. You've got that momentum, and then it's very difficult to fail from this point. So long as you're practicing meditation every single day, you're putting in the right effort every single day, whether that's 5 minutes or more, you're taking steps. And that's it. That's success right there. So long as you're taking steps every single day, then you're on the path towards success, towards transformation. We want to do more than 5 minutes of meditation a day, of course, but that can come later on. We can start to expand our practice when we become autonomous. You start feeling confident in the practice, like there's no way that I'm not going to meditate every single day. Then we start expanding. We might set the goal for 10 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day. But slowly, we want to start increasing the load. Similar with bodybuilding, you don't start on the first day with 100 kilograms on the bench press. You'll crush yourself under the weight of your own expectations. And it's the same in meditation. Meditation and bodybuilding are very, very similar, almost the same. One's just physical and one is spiritual. So we start with maybe 10 kilograms on the bench press and gradually build ourselves up. Same in meditation. It's the growth principles are very similar, if not the same. Okay, so today I just want to talk about the benefits of meditation in relation to mental health. That's the lens for me personally. I look at meditation through the lens of mental health and cultivating sustainable mental stability, as that's what I've always been without throughout my life. That's always what I've lacked throughout my life. And for me, that's the most important thing, as I see that the mental health epidemic on planet Earth at the moment is out of control. So many people are suffering with mental health. And, you know, for me, that's what comes first. Rather than nirvana and all of these lofty Buddhist concepts that are really unrelatable, we need to get our mentals sorted out first before we can start thinking about, you know, taking it further and realizing samadhi and nirvana and all of these sort of things. So for me, these things are secondary and unimportant. Well, not unimportant, but less important than cultivating that strong foundation, that strong platform of sustainable mental stability. So I see that in our society, in the collective human consciousness, there are sort of three major issues that all stem from the same problem, or the same cause, I suppose. So we don't know who we are, we don't know what we're doing here, and we don't know how to take care of ourselves. And I feel like the big problems, the diseases, the depression, the anxiety, the suicide, all this stuff that's happening, all of the problems that we're experiencing as a collective species at the moment come from a lack of relationship with ourselves. We're so divorced from our truth, our true nature, so divorced from our relationship with ourselves, and we suffer as a result of this. We're indoctrinated into this society and we're expected to operate in a specific way to serve capitalistic consumerism to our own detriment. We don't really get to honour or investigate ourselves as thoroughly as I feel like we need to be able to live sustainable lives for the most part. Now, some of us are mentally stable and sustainable, and that's fine. And this may not be relevant to you, but this is, you know, my focus in when it comes to meditation and Buddhism. So sorry for those who don't need to hear this, but I feel like there's a lot of us who do. So yeah, a lot of the problems, most of the problems, if not all of the problems, come from the lack of relationship with self. We're very disconnected from ourselves. We're focused on all of these ideals, which are ultimately meaningless from my perspective. Gain materials, you know, gain money, gain success, gain fame. Like all of these things are just completely insubstantial and meaningless, and will not yield sustainable happiness or will not yield liberation from suffering. They may provide temporary sensory gratification, but the temporary sensory gratification is ultimately insubstantial and meaningless. And this is something that we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into throughout this discourse today. We're all chasing that sensory gratification. Some of us may realize, some of us may not realize, but this sensory gratification that we all seek, that we're all chasing after, is unfulfilling. It arises and then it passes away, leaving us ultimately empty-handed. Trying to seek satisfaction or meaning or substance in the sensory realm is it's like trying to hold water in your hands. You know, it's trying to grasp for substance where there is fundamentally none to be found. And this is one of the Buddha's teachings, of course. Anicca, impermanence. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. There is no substance. There is nothing in the sensory realm which will ultimately satisfy you due to the transient nature of form. Nothing stays, you know, and we're trying to find sustainability in that which is just doing this. So we're chasing a ghost in that sense, basically. And the Buddha pointed towards a sustainable sense of happiness, a sense of satisfaction, meaning, purpose, fulfillment, tranquility, bliss, all of these kind of things beyond the sensory realm, beyond that which we are seeking in our ignorance, called nirvana, the ultimate truth, liberation from suffering, the end of suffering, essentially. So, you know, a permanent state of bliss and happiness. So, so I want to talk a little bit today about the difference between the intellect and the intuition. So we spend our lives, we've been indoctrinated by society, we're very intellectual, very analytical, very ego-driven, focused on the self, me, myself, and I. It's a very one-dimensional mode of operation, essentially, this intellectual paradigm, this egotistical paradigm. I would say that it's like running on Windows 97 when we've got the latest operating system. That's, what's the latest Windows? Windows something? I don't know.
11.
Windows 11. So we're running on, in our ignorance, we're running on Windows 97 when we have Windows 11 available. And why would we not upgrade to Windows 11 when we have the opportunity to do so? Because it's got all of the latest features, it's effective, it's efficient, it's the best at doing what it's set out to do. You know, Windows 97, it's not the most efficient thing at doing what it does. We've got a better tool available that we can use to our advantage, yet we still remain invested in and married to this redundant mechanism, you know, which serves its purpose to a relative degree, but it's a term that it's in the realm of bandwidth, I suppose. The major difference is in the realm of bandwidth. Is everybody familiar with the term bandwidth? It's the rate at which information can travel freely from one point to another. So if you're downloading a movie and you've got a very narrow bandwidth, that movie's going to take a long time to download. So if your download speed is maybe 1 kilobyte per second, like dial-up internet speed, you'll be downloading that movie. It might take a couple of days, who knows, to download that movie. But you want to watch the movie now, right? You want that solution now. You don't want to wait. The latest Avengers movie just came out and you want to watch it right now. Don't do that though, because downloading is illegal. So if you wanted to watch that movie right now, you'd want a faster download speed. You want a wider bandwidth. You want that information to come through very quickly. You want a strong connection, essentially. So if you've got a megabyte or even a gigabyte download speed, then it's going to happen very, very quickly. So similarly, if you're using the very one-dimensional, intellectual, egotistical, analytical kind of narrative that we use to navigate our way through this reality, it's kind of like trying to fill a swimming pool rather with a garden hose. There's not much information coming through. It's going to be very slow. You're not going to get all of the pieces to the jigsaw puzzle as quickly as you might need them to solve the problem at hand, which means that if we can't resolve the issues that arise when they're arising, we create unresolved trauma for ourselves. Now, so many of us are burdened by a lot of these unresolved traumas in our lives, and that's because, you know, we're trying to fill the swimming pool with the garden hose. The most effective way to fill the swimming pool, albeit more expensive, but sometimes it can be worth it if you really want an efficient solution, is to hire a helicopter with one of those, a firefighting helicopter, and you fly over a lake, you suck up all the water, go back to the swimming pool, and then dump the water. And then bang, instantaneously, you've got all of the water in the swimming pool. You've got all of the pieces to the jigsaw puzzle, and it came through instantly. Now, the thing is, the problem with the intellect is that it doesn't have the depth, it doesn't have the bandwidth to help us with some of the big issues in our lives. Yes, we can do our taxes, we can work our jobs, we can do whatever, all of the mundane tasks, of course. But what about the issues of the heart? And what about the issues of the spirit? So these are things that the intellect doesn't really have the capacity to touch or to help us with. Now, me personally, I pride myself on being a very intellectual, very analytical kind of person, and I can use cold logic to deal with, you know, most of the things in my life. But there are things that logic doesn't work for, which is the issues of the heart and the issues of the spirit. So all of us, there's no exceptions. We're all going to go through emotional issues in our lives. We're all going to have spiritual issues in our lives. There's going to be challenges that we just don't know how to deal with such overpowering and overwhelming emotions. Trying to use logic or intellect to work through these things, it's often going to result in a short circuit. We're going to blow a fuse. You know, we're going to be overwhelmed and incapacitated by the immensity of the experiences that a lot of us will experience in our lives. You know, like your dad dies, your best friend commits suicide, you lose your job, your relationship breaks down, like you name it. So many things. There's so many things that are going to happen that we get stuck on. We become stagnant in our lives because the intellect cannot resolve these issues. It cannot give us the conclusion that we need, which is why so many of us suffer, because we have just this compounding mass of unresolved traumas in our lives. As we continue to move through reality, these experiences will continue to come for us. So the Buddha said, the first of the three characteristics that the Buddha pointed out about this reality was anicca, which is impermanence. Nothing lasts, and there are no exceptions to this rule. If you investigate very well, you'll see that everything, all phenomenon is arising and passing away. Nothing lasts forever, everything is changing. The Buddha said, there's a very famous Vipassana teacher who said that, the Buddha said that reality is oscillating, so arising and passing away, being born and dying, expanding and contracting at a rate of 22 trillion frames per second. So there is fundamentally no substance, no solidity, it's all just motion, it's all moving. So anicca, impermanence, nothing lasts. And then the second characteristic, or in no particular order, is dukkha, which is suffering, or it roughly translates to suffering, or that which is unendurable. So suffering will come. There will always be unfavorable experiences which will arise in our lives. Make no mistake, there's no exceptions to this, and I'm sure that all of us can agree with that suffering, or an experience which could potentially yield suffering, will arise. But it all depends on how we react to this situation. So suffering is a choice. We choose to suffer based on our inability to deal with the experiences that we react to, which causes the suffering. So suffering arises as a result of things not going according to plan. So when we have something that we don't want, suffering. When we don't have something that we do want, suffering. We can't be happy until we get what we want, or we can't be happy until we get rid of what we don't want. And there's always going to be this particular kind of phenomenon in our lives in some way, shape, or form. Something that we want that we don't have, and something that we have that we don't want. We're never happy with things in the way that they are. So we're always suffering to a greater or lesser extent. So the magnitude of this suffering, depends on the circumstance, of course. Some sufferings are going to be, very intense, and some sufferings are going to be a little bit less intense. Some things are going to be minor inconveniences, and some things are going to be insurmountable kind of objects that we just do not know how to move through or climb. We can't quite deal with the magnitude of this particular suffering. But, suffering, it's all the same. No matter what package it comes in, the experience of suffering, it's the same. So some people, they love to compare their suffering and identify with their suffering and say, oh, I'm a victim, you don't understand, my suffering's worse than yours. And this is a very dangerous habit. You're asking for suffering. You're married to your suffering in that sense, and you're essentially adding fuel to the fire in that respect. So it's all suffering. We don't want to compare our suffering. Suffering is suffering. So everyone's suffering. We're all experiencing suffering. The Buddha said that there's a path. No matter how big or small you think that your suffering is, the path out of suffering remains the same. So your suffering could have come in any package, but the path out of the suffering, it remains the same. So don't try and say like, oh, but I'm special, but my suffering, it's this, oh, it's so serious. I'm like, oh no, this can't help me. Like it's all the same. It's not special. So I know so many people who are so attached to their suffering, and they're such victims, and they can't get out of their own way to help themselves. So this is why I say what I'm saying right now, because dealing with these people, it's frustrating. So just not willing to help themselves. So you can't help someone who's not willing to help themselves. So you got to be willing to help yourself in that sense. So firstly, we want to not take ourselves so seriously, and let go of our victimhood in that sense. And this is the first step for a lot of people to start moving away from suffering, because if we're identifying so heavily with our suffering, then we're not giving ourselves a chance to move away from it, because we're attached to our suffering in that sense. You've identified with your suffering, you're holding on to it, you're investing in it, you're giving it the energy that it needs to survive. So, okay, and the third characteristic that the Lord Buddha pointed out about this reality is anatta, which means non-self. So the ideas that we have about ourselves, our egos, I am me, this is you, I am separate from you, we're different, this is false. It appears to be that way, but once again, we've just got to keep in mind the level of ignorance in humanity at the moment. And I'm not saying that to try and be nasty or anything like that, but just the science says that human beings, well, based on the largest spectrum that we currently have available, which is not necessarily the totality of the universe, the electromagnetic spectrum. So science says that human beings are only in tune with 0.0000001%, or some infinitesimally small percentage of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which means that there's 99.999999999% of what we can detect so far that we're completely ignorant of. So ignorance, it's not like a nasty kind of thing. I'm not saying, oh, you're ignorant and you're a bad person. It's like there's so much ignorance. So we don't know what we don't know. So here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and then from here to Bangkok, that's what we don't know that we don't know. The universe is very large, and we're very, very ignorant. So we think self, we think me, we think mine, we think ego. We're very entrenched within this egotistical perspective. But the Buddha said that there is no separation. Everything is fundamentally interdependent and interconnected. So we can't exist without everything else. Everything else depends on, or everything depends on everything else. So we've got to take into consideration, we couldn't exist without mother and father. We couldn't exist without the sun, without the earth, without the rain, without the food, without all of these things. But we are so heavily invested in this, selfish, self-centric, perspective, this narrative that we have. And this is one of the big ways in which we hurt ourselves. Thinking about ourselves, not thinking about anybody else, moving through life with a very self-centered kind of perspective. So we'll talk a little bit more about this as we progress through our discussion. So the difference between the intellect and the intuition. In meditation, I feel like we're shifting from the intellect, from this very one-dimensional kind of modality towards the intuition, which is quite multi-dimensional in the ways in which it can benefit our lives and help us. So what's happening in meditation is that we're stilling the mind. We're training ourselves to get out of our own way. We're so attached to this, narrow bandwidth perspective. We're so attached to our ego. We're so attached to the way in which we've always done things. But what we want to do in our meditation is dismantle or disintegrate that mechanism and make way for something greater. So something greater than our idea of ourselves. So we all take ourselves very seriously, but we don't have any idea to the degree to which we get in our own way. Like the magnitude of the way in which we get in our own way is just enormous, based on how heavily we subscribe to the way in which we've currently or been used to moving through our lives. The Buddha pointed out that there's a better way, a better tool, something that's more effective, something that's more efficient, something that can give us more pieces of this infinite jigsaw puzzle. When we're using the intellect, we're only getting a very small number of pieces to the jigsaw puzzle, but when we use the intuition, we gain a lot more pieces. So in the first sermon that the Buddha gave after realizing nirvana, the ultimate truth, he gave the Dhammachak. So this is the most important chant in Buddhism, and if you stick around after the 3-day retreat, we might get a chance to chant the Dhammachak. It's very powerful. So the Buddha said this 12 times throughout this discourse. He said, Udapadi Yanang, Udapadi Panya, Udapadi Vijja. And this means wisdom arose, insight arose, supreme knowledge arose. So it just happens. When we meditate very well, we have an opportunity to experience wisdom, a deep sense of wisdom, a deep sense of insight, and a deep sense of guidance that comes from who knows where. It doesn't come from the intellect, that's for sure. It can be a big surprise when this wisdom arises like a flash of lightning. All of a sudden, you have this information that you've never considered before, you never thought of before, you never comprehended it before, and all of a sudden it's just there, and you're like, where did this come from? That was extraordinary. That was quite a surprise. It can be a bit of a shock. So when we practice meditation, we're stilling the mind. We're reducing the frequency of the mind, and this is what we're aiming to do. We want to create some space for the wisdom to arise. We want to open the bandwidth of our connection to that which is greater than our idea of ourselves. Call it nirvana, call it God, spirit, source, whatever you want, nature, it doesn't matter. The definition doesn't matter, but we can all connect with this thing, which is greater than our idea of ourselves. But when we're so invested in our idea of ourselves, then there's no space for this beautiful, supportive thing to arise. We're getting in our own way. We're getting in the way of the natural flow of things. We're obstructing the flow. So the ego, the attachment to this delusion of ego is something which quite heavily obstructs our potential to connect with this multi-dimensional thing. Terence McKenna, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Terence McKenna, but he called it the transcendental object at the end of time. Christianity calls it God, Buddhism calls it nirvana, spiritual people call it source or whatever, it doesn't matter. But this thing, it can start to play a role in our lives in ways in which we could never imagine. It's beyond our ability to comprehend. But what we firstly need to do to be able to connect, to be able to open up the bandwidth of our connection to this thing is practice silencing the mind, training the mind to sit down and shut up. Because all the mind does, for the most part, it does play its role, of course, but there's a more effective tool that we have that does the mind's job much better. The mind is so used to just chattering away, blah, 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 I'm important, I'm special, look at me, all these kind of things, I want this, I don't want that. It's all just noise. I would say that 95 to maybe even 99 or even 100% of the things that we think on a daily basis are completely excessive and redundant. It's just noise. It's just taking up all of your space, all of your time, all of your energy, just thinking. chronically and compulsively every single day, going nowhere, just going around in circles, just burning yourself out, it's debilitating. And I'm speaking from my own experience because I'm an extremely ADHD person. My biggest problem was exactly this. My heritage, I was a suicidally depressed person, having no idea how to deal with my mind, no idea how to deal with my emotions, no idea how to deal with reality. And it was just too overwhelming for me. I remember thinking constantly throughout my life, when am I going to get a break? When is my mind going to shut up? And it never did. And over time, gradually, that burden just became so heavy that my suicidal ideation became very, very serious. And I'll never know how close I became because I know that it can take just a single moment where you can snap and lose control. But I was very short on the will to live for very, very many years as a result of my, spiritual incompetence, I suppose, or my delusions. So this chattering mind, it causes so many problems. As we can start to see, we can start to experience for ourselves beyond any doubt that in the stillness of the mind that we create for ourselves through practicing meditation very well, when we do become very accomplished in meditation, we cultivate this blissful platform of stillness for ourselves. And we can start to experience that in the stillness of the mind, there is no problems, there are no problems. We start to see that, it's the thinking that is the problem. It's the thinking itself that is the problem. This might be conceptual for a lot of people. It's something that we each need to experience for ourselves to fully understand. But if you stay the course and stick to your meditation, you will find out for yourself. So if we do what we've always done, then we'll get what we've always gotten. And if you're sick and tired of getting what you've always gotten, that's why I'm a monk, then you'll do something different. It's as simple as that. Because, if you keep doing what you've always done, then why would you expect that anything would change? So if you're sick of getting what you've always gotten, it's time to shift. It's time to make a change, to make a difference in your lives. And meditation is the way in which we can make that difference. So some of us may be dealing with some very severe mental health issues. Some of us may be struggling with the will to live. It's a very normal thing in this day and age. I know a lot of people who are. So this is a great mechanism that we can use to help ourselves. I would argue that meditation is the supreme healing tool that we have available to us, the supreme balancing mechanism that we can use to get our lives back in order and cultivate sustainable mental stability for ourselves, work through all of our unresolved traumas, and learn how to become spiritual warriors, to be able to deal with any challenge that life throws your way with grace, with balance, with composure, and with harmony. But we've got to give it a chance because it's very slow. It takes time. So same as bodybuilding. You don't go to the gym on the first day and expect to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You don't go to the gym on the first day and come home and look in the mirror and say, oh, I'm going to give up. I'm not going back tomorrow. Nothing happened. Oh, no. That's delusional. We know that there are natural principles for growth, that everything follows. So why would there be any exception in meditation? We want to grow, we want to evolve through meditation. There's a process, and we're not in control of that process. So it's important to let go, to relinquish the outcome completely, because it's not up to you. So you plant an avocado seed in the ground. You don't stand there saying, hurry up, I want an avocado. It's going to take years for that plant to mature, to get to the point where it's ready to bear fruit. It has to grow. All we can do is make sure that the soil is fertile, that seed gets enough water, enough sunlight, enough of what it needs to grow, and then leave the rest to nature. Same with meditation. We just want to make sure that the soil is fertile. Make sure that you apply yourself. Make sure that you're giving your seed of meditation some water, giving it everything that it needs. Meditation can show you how to nourish that seed as well. It can show you how to refine your process to the point where you know for a fact that you're on track. So now this takes time, of course, but the master has failed more times than the beginner is even willing to try. So don't give up when the going gets tough. It's going to be very tough, exceptionally tough. It's going to be the most challenging thing that you've ever done. You're going to have to face yourself. You can't run away anymore. So many of us run away from our problems. We use coping mechanisms, sex, drugs, alcohol, all of these kind of things to not have to deal with and sit with and accept and embrace and work through all of these unresolved traumas or these traumatic experiences that we have. So we can't run away anymore. We've got to turn and face it. So the key to transformation, the key to growth in meditation is acceptance. Acceptance is the tool that we can use to become alchemists in our lives. When we run away, you can run forever, but these things, they're never going to go away. They're always going to be there until you deal with them. I'm sorry, that's just a fact. You can argue with that all you want. You can spend your life arguing with that all you want, but you'll go absolutely nowhere. So meditation is going to help us to train ourselves by finding this comfortable space, this strong platform that we can use to deal with these deep, dark traumas that we have in our lives, to deal with these traumatic experiences that we go through in our lives. A lot of us are afraid. We don't want to feel that which is discomfort. We don't want to feel that which is non-preferable. When something doesn't go our way, we don't want to accept it. Oh, why me? Why did this happen to me? I didn't want that. Like, no, I wanted this, not that. We just can't accept a lot of these things in our lives. But, nature gives you what nature gives you. 99, almost 100% of everything is out of your control. You have absolutely little control over what happens in your life. All we really have control over is where we place our attention. And we spend our lives trying to fight nature. We try to fight the universe. And that effort is absolutely futile. You're banging your head against a wall. So things happen in the way in which they happen. And for the most part, almost 100% of the time, we have no control over the way that it goes. So the most valuable thing that we can do for ourselves is to train ourselves very well to be neutral, to learn how to accept things as they are, as they arise, because we can't get away from it. We can't escape the negative, or that which we would define as negative, which ultimately gives rise to suffering. You get what you don't want. You don't get what you do want. And then we get mad about it. And then we suffer until that situation is resolved. And a lot of the time it isn't going to be resolved in accordance with our preferences. So if our well-being, if our happiness, if our contentment, if our peace, if our tranquility is so inherently dependent on the external circumstances of our lives being in alignment with our preferences, then we will always suffer, always. So meditation can teach us how to take our power back by learning how to be very neutral to these things. So neutrality is the key. Attachment causes suffering. So we want to practice detachment in meditation. We want to practice letting go, just practice acceptance, just being objective to the circumstances that life throws our way without having too many preferences. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's important to have goals and something that we're working towards in life, but we can't expect everything to go exactly in the way in which we want it to because there are so many variables at play. So we're practicing this art of neutrality in meditation. We're practicing creating space so that we can connect with the intuition, which can give us the full picture. The intuition can show us the reason why everything happens in the way in which it does, which can help to diminish our reaction, can help to reduce the inflammation that we cause as a result of reacting when things don't go the way in which we want it to go. Meditation can help us to clear the mind, to see things very clearly, to see things in a special way. So I want to talk about meditation in relation to healing on every level. So mental/emotional, spiritual, and physical as well. There's no one that meditation can't help. There's no issue, there's no problem, there's no layer of our experience that meditation cannot provide support or value to. There are no exceptions to this, I firmly believe. Now, the Buddha said, ehi pasiko, which means come and see for yourself. So the Buddha was talking about all of these amazing things, all nirvana, the liberation from suffering, ultimate happiness. But he said, don't believe me. My experience means nothing to you. You may have some intellectual understanding about what the Buddha was saying, but that is not the truth. An intellectual understanding is not the truth. It's a relative truth. It's not the whole picture. Once again, moving through life with the intellectual perspective, it's very one-dimensional. So the Buddha knew this and he said, you must experience for yourself, come and see for yourself. It's the experiential understanding which is multidimensional, which gives us all of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that we need to see something as clearly as we need to see it for us to be able to gain the full understanding that would be necessary to, have the full comprehension of the issue or the problem or the whatever it is that we're trying to understand. So we practice just this single-pointed concentration. Samma arahang, samma arahang, samma arahang, samma arahang, samma arahang, samma arahang, or focusing on the breath or whatever it is. So there's no right or wrong in meditation. There's no better or worse. Just choose an object that feels comfortable for you without any judgment. It can be anything. So we don't want to spend too much time trying to be too critical or judgmental about the object. Anything will do, so long as it's comfortable, so long as you can comfortably reinforce your attention or maintain your attention upon it for as long as you're meditating. If it's 5 minutes, if it's 10 minutes, we want to make sure that so long as we sit down in meditation, we're making that effort. We're driving, we're pushing, We've got to have our foot down on the gas pedal at least a little bit in meditation. We can't sit here, just drifting aimlessly, allowing the mind to wander away. We must be willing to sit and work and make the right effort. We can't sit here and allow the mind to wander aimlessly and hope that something will change, or even call that meditation, because in fact that's mindlessness. So it requires application. You must play an active role in your meditation. And just do your best to maintain your attention exclusively upon the one thing. Now, the mind is going to wander away, of course. The mind is going to go here, the mind is going to go there. But we must keep a vigilant watch over the mind and be ready and willing to guide the attention back towards the object. So it's just repetition. To become skillful in meditation, it's just repetition. That's all it is. So how we learn any skill? Repetition. In Australia, when we want to train a dog to walk by our side, a new puppy dog, and it just wants to run around and sniff everything and pee on everything, and we say, no, come here. We don't want you doing that. You want to be a good dog, okay? You behave very well. So we pull back on the lead and we say, heel, heel. I want you to walk by my heel, by my foot. Heel, heel, over and over and over and over and over and over and over, until the dog gets the message. And over time, the dog starts to understand the command to the point where it becomes second nature, and the dog stays by your heel, doesn't run away anymore. It becomes well trained. Same in meditation. We just want to get to the point where the mind is well trained. We're familiar with the stillness. We know the stillness very well. We're not reacting to the thoughts anymore. We're not interacting with the mental activity that's arising. So thoughts will arise in the mind, of course, but thoughts and thinking are different things. So just because a thought arises in the mind, it doesn't mean that you must think that thought. What we want to do in meditation is practice not thinking that thought. Just observe the thought. The thought will arise, of course, but we want to try and observe that thought like a cloud passing across the sky. Just be very objective. Don't attach to it. Don't invest in it. Don't be married to it. Don't identify with it. Just say, okay, it's a thought, and just let it pass on by, and it will. So all thoughts do this. All phenomenon does this, arises to pass away. And by thinking these thoughts, where, the bandwidth is very narrow. We don't want to be thinking our thoughts. It's a very one-dimensional, narrow bandwidth kind of modality, I suppose. We want to let go and just be spacious. So practice this detachment. So usually when we're moving through our day, the mind is just like this, like very, very fast, moving from one object to the next, thinking this, thinking that, just very crazy. So we want the mind instead to be doing kind of like this, like very gentle. We want to reduce the frequency of the mind. Instead of just pinging all over the place like this, we want it to be quite just calm and relaxed and flowy, just like a wave. So by focusing on our meditation object like this, in this repetitive single-pointed concentration, we are actively reducing the frequency of the mind by doing just one thing. Because so long as we're subscribing to and investing in that particular modality, just next, like that, we're inflaming the mind. We're keeping the mind very active. And we're keeping the mind very active in this sense. And when the mind is so stimulated, when we're just chronically and compulsively thinking all of our thoughts, there's no room for God. There's no room for nirvana. There's no room for source. There's no room for insight, and there's no room for wisdom, because we are so 100% consumed by all of our mental nonsense, which is ultimately insubstantial. And it's a huge obstruction. So we want to let go of all of these things and stop taking ourselves and our thoughts so seriously. And that's the problem. We take ourselves way too seriously. So the detachment is the key. So when the thought arises, when the whatever it is arises, no matter how important you might think it is or how important this thought wants to be, because every thought says, think me, I'm important, think me, and we think the thought. We want to practice instead just being aware of the thought when it arises and becoming as objective as we possibly can be to that thought. We say, okay, all right, there's a thought. Just because there's a thought doesn't mean that I have to think it. So we just want to let it go instead. And keep the mind. We want the meditation object to be like a magnet or an anchor point for the mind. So the same way in which an anchor holds a ship still in the ocean, we want to use our meditation object as an anchor and just keep reinforcing, training the mind. You stay here. We don't worry about that. We don't care about this. Reinforcing. It takes effort, of course. We can't avoid that. Accepting the necessity of making effort in your meditation will secure your success, for sure. No doubt. It just takes time. So over time, the mind will be trained very, very well to not do this anymore. So I'll use this example a lot. Every time we think a thought, we lose our center. A thought arises and we go, a thought. It's like a dog chasing cars. Where does it lead? It leads to nowhere. So Over time, we train the mind very well to not go reaching for every thought anymore. We train the mind to just be still, to be balanced, to be composed, to be calm, to just observe the thoughts. And when we can train ourselves very well in this way, we have much more space for ourselves. So in this space, in this beautiful, blissful, tranquil space, in the right moment, this is when we can start to experience the wisdom, the insight, the guidance. If we can train ourselves not to try to solve all of our problems intellectually, because trying to solve problems intellectually can often be a lot like this, losing our balance, losing our center. We just get caught down the rabbit hole. And for the most part, trying to solve a lot of the problems that we experience in our lives is like banging your head against a brick wall and expecting the brick wall to yield. The brick wall doesn't yield. I spent so much time and so much energy smashing my head against a brick wall throughout my life, trying to make the brick wall yield, and it never did. I was never able to resolve most of the problems in my life in this way, and I kept trying and I kept trying and I just never could. So we want to let God help us. We want to let Nirvana help us. We want to let something greater than our idea of ourselves help us. And it can, and it will. And you can experience this directly for yourselves. No expectations, of course. I just want to create a bit of a framework for meditation because for the most part, practicing meditation can be a bit of a blind kind of thing, like what's happening, what's going on, like I don't know. So I feel like creating this kind of framework can be very valuable, but it's very, very, very important. The most important thing to let go of any expectations of anything happening because expectations are not meditation. Meditation is meditation, and that's all. We want to be like a laser beam, focused exclusively on the one thing, just trusting the process. Once again, to strike that balance between discipline and surrender is the key. So when we cultivate this stillness of the mind, we can start to experience beyond any doubt that we will know exactly what we need to know, exactly when we need to know it. We will do exactly what we need to do, exactly when we need to do it. We will be exactly where we need to be, exactly when we need to be there. We will say exactly what we need to say, exactly when we need to say it. We will experience exactly what we need to experience, exactly when we need to experience it. And this may not make sense when it happens, but with the power of insight and wisdom that comes from meditation, we can start to see things from a much more holistic kind of perspective. And this is the key. All of these, random experiences that happen in our lives, they start to come together to form this beautiful and intricate tapestry or fabric. And everything starts to make much more sense when the wisdom and the insight of meditation becomes our ally. And this does take time, of course. And the right wisdom will arise at the right time. So we might be going through our lives and having a plethora of different experiences, and some of which we don't know how to deal with, and then they become unresolved traumas, and they cast a shadow over our lives. And I'm sure many of us can relate to this, feeling haunted by some of the experiences that we've been through. I'm sure all of us have had some of these. I have, absolutely. I don't think that any of us are not going to have these experiences that we just don't know how to deal with. So we get stuck, we become stagnant. And this can be a big problem. When we get stuck, when we get stagnant, that's when disease arises. That's when depression, that's when anxiety, that's when mental disease. It comes in many different shapes and sizes, many different forms, but these unresolved traumas give birth to the suffering that we experience. So I feel like this is something that humanity needs to focus a little bit more on at the moment, because I feel like what we're doing at the moment, we're going around in circles. We've gone so far in the wrong direction, and we're not really helping ourselves. We're harming ourselves, and we need to learn how to take better care of ourselves, because there are so many people around the planet committing suicide at the moment, so much mental illness, so many people suffering, and there's a solution, there's a way out, there's something that we can do to heal. And to grow and to evolve and to liberate ourselves from this needless suffering. So when we know the way, when we know the method, we can start to understand the fact that suffering is a choice. When we start to put this method into practice, we become our best friend. We become our own healer. We can become our own psychologist. We can become our own lawyer, our own financial advisor, our own fitness coach, our own anything, whatever. The right wisdom will arise at the right time to help you in the direction that you're intending towards. So if you want to grow, if you want to evolve, if you want to develop yourself in meditation, that source of wisdom is there to support you. If you want to do anything, whatever it is, if you set a strong intention, you want to work towards something, just create some space in the mind, and then the supportive wisdom can arise to help you to reveal the path, I suppose. So now it's a slow process. I'm going to say this a lot, of course, because it is. It takes its time. It's very slow. We must be patient, and we must be persistent. And for those who can be patient and persistent, you will be rewarded. Absolutely. So, now it can be really difficult to let go of these traumas when they arise in meditation. They grab you and they suck you in. It's like a vacuum cleaner, and we just get caught up telling ourselves the same old stories, stuck in the loop of suffering, stuck in the loop of that experience. And it's difficult to let go of because we're so heavily identified with our suffering. So this is a big challenge. But if you have the presence of mind to recognize when your unresolved traumas arise, all of your triggers, all of your sufferings, all of the inflammation, all of the anger, all of the pain, all of the built-up emotion, all of the depression, all of these things, no matter how powerful the emotion is, no matter what form the emotion comes in, if you can practice being objective to these things, you can heal yourself. You can move through these things. You can find the way through. So meditation is something that can help us to build the ship, which can get us safely through any storm. We just want to make sure that we build our ship very well, because the seas in life become very rough sometimes and the going gets very tough. And if we haven't built our ship very well, then we will sink to the bottom of the ocean. So it's important to spend time building this mechanism, this supportive mechanism, to ensure that when the suffering or when the difficult experience arises, that we know how to deal with it. Has anyone seen The Karate Kid? The original one? Not the one with Jackie Chan and Jaden Smith. The original one with Daniel-san, Mr. Miyagi. So Daniel-san, what's his last name? LaRosa or something. Yeah. He's getting bullied. He's getting beaten up, and he's not happy about it. He's suffering. And he's like, oh, I need to learn how to defend myself. And he comes across Mr. Miyagi, who's a karate master. And he says, Mr. Miyagi, teach me karate. And he says, okay, come to my house. That was a bad Japanese accent. He says, come to my house. And Daniel-san's like, okay, yes. And he comes to Mr. Miyagi's house and he says, all right, let's learn some karate. And Mr. Miyagi's like, okay, paint the fence. And he's like, what? Mr. Miyagi gives him the paintbrush, gives him the paint. He says, paint the fence like this. He says, I thought we were going to learn some karate. He says, paint the fence. So he gives him the paintbrush and leaves him to it. And Daniel-san just painting the fence. Like, what? What's going on? I want to learn some karate. Mr. Miyagi, we're going to learn some karate? And he says, yes, wax the car. So he gives him the polish, gives him the wax, and he says, like this, wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. And Daniel-san's like, oh, okay, wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. Just going through the same motion, just the repetition, wax on, wax off. Getting to the point where it just becomes second nature for him. He knows it very well, just wax on. Mr. Miyagi says, no, like this, wax on, wax off. Paint the fence like this. Very, very specific. You know, getting him to do it in a very specific way, integrating this movement into his subconscious. Daniel-san finally gets fed up and he says, come on, old man, teach me some karate. I'm sick of this. And he's like, okay, wax the car. And he throws a punch and Daniel-san goes, oh, I've been learning karate the entire time. Oh my God, I had no idea. Wow, it all makes sense now. So the entire time, Daniel-san was learning karate, learning how to defend himself. Same in meditation. What we're doing, it might not make any sense. We don't know what we're doing, but we've just got to trust the process. We must trust Mr. Miyagi. Just sit there and practice the samma arahang. The intellect isn't going to be able to make sense of it. The logic is going to be like, what's the point? Like, this isn't karate. Like, what's happening? But you know, if you trust the process, then you'll be surprised as to how powerful you can become when it comes to dealing with these difficulties which arise in our lives, which we will all inevitably and invariably face. There's no escaping it. And if you train yourself very well, if you become a black belt in meditation, then nothing will ever cause unresolved trauma for you again. If you're prepared very well, then you'll know how to deal with all of these experiences as they arise, rather than letting them become unresolved traumas because you are unequipped. You don't have the skills, you don't have the tools. I'll take questions later on. I've got a lot to get through, sorry. So meditation is exactly that. It's training us to become spiritual warriors in ways in which we can't fully comprehend until the challenges arise. So we don't recognize how powerful we're actually becoming during the process. So what's important is to just cultivate that balance between discipline and surrender. So what's happening is that we're practicing this detachment. The problem is the reaction. We suffer because we react. When things don't go according to plan, it's our reaction which adds fuel to the fire, which causes the suffering. Like, oh no, it didn't happen the way I wanted it to happen. Like, oh, that's suffering. It's not the problem itself, it's the reaction. So we're training ourselves to be neutral, to be equanimous, to be non-reactive. And in this way, we can train ourselves to not cause suffering anymore. Yes, there may still be things that arise, of course, that don't go according to plan, but we're going to be better equipped to be able to deal with these things. Because reaction is not dealing with these things. It's creating aversion or creating attachment. Oh, I want this. Oh, I want. Don't want. We're not accepting the cards that reality has dealt for us, and then that causes the inflammation that leads to the suffering. So when you don't want anything, you get everything. Is the saying. So it's just this non-reaction skill. When something arises, as painful or as uncomfortable or as depressing or as angry as it might make you feel, or any of the emotions which arise, we want to practice just, okay, let it go, okay? Or this denotes aversion. We don't want to do that. So we just want to be like, okay, all right, let it go. Okay, samma arahang, samma arahang, samma arahang, samma arahang. We don't want to waste any time or energy trying to fight it or trying to change it or trying to get it to be something that it wasn't. Because it is what it is, right? It went the way that it went. And our job is to just accept. Our job is to just make peace with the way in which things happen. Because once again, almost everything is out of our control. We can't control everything. So why are we so upset when things don't go our way? Here we are with our, our arrogance and our egos and our bravado and our sense of self-importance, and things should go the way in which I want it to go. I'm important, look at me. Reality does not bow to the ego. And it's to have any expectations, to have these preferences is just, from where I sit, I think it's laughable. It really is laughable. We take ourselves too seriously. So we just want to practice not taking ourselves so seriously. When something doesn't go our way, when tragedy strikes, or when something, doesn't go according to our preferences, just try to practice acceptance rather than getting angry about it and fueling that fire. Letting go is the way in which we can make peace with our reality and be a good friend to ourselves and find that balance and that harmony, that closure, that resolution, that acceptance, and then move on in our lives and not get stuck. If we can learn how to accept these things as they arise, then we don't get stuck. It's the non-acceptance, it's the attachment, it's the craving, it's the aversion that creates the stagnation, that creates the getting stuck. Now, acceptance, once again, it's a very hard thing to do because we don't want to accept things not going our way, right? But then that's ego, and we're trying to diminish our sense of self, our sense of like preference and that sort of thing, because it leads to suffering. Attachment leads to suffering. So very, very difficult, extremely difficult. Don't feel alone in that sense, in that fact. Everyone who practices meditation is going to go through similar, if not the same kind of things. It's very, very challenging. But I know people who go through their lives suffering needlessly, whose unresolved traumas haunt them, 60, 70, 80 years old, they haven't got over the death of their parents, the loss of a loved one, the breakup of a relationship, whatever it is. I know people who go through their life and their suffering just haunts them and casts a shadow over their life. It's like walking through life with an enormous thorn in your side, just walking through life just bleeding. And it's needless. We don't need to suffer. We can move through these things. We can help ourselves and get on with our lives and cultivate that balance and the harmony and find the resolution and the closure that we're all looking for. So now I want to talk about exactly what I've been speaking about in relatable terms through my own personal experience. Because what I'm talking about, it's not something that I've read in a book. What I'm talking about, it comes from the felt presence of my own direct experience, going through life in the way in which I have, and using meditation as a tool to help me in the ways in which my intellect never could. So I was always a very depressed and anxious person. I've always had mental health problems, suicidally depressed for the most of my life, just so much unresolved trauma. The mass of that unresolved trauma, something that just keeps compounding throughout life. More problems happen. I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to deal with that. Like, they don't teach this in school. Like, what do we do? Like, I only know how to do 1 + 1 = 2. I don't know anything else. So just moving through life as a very, with a lot of suffering, essentially. So for me in my life, what's been important to me is understanding the deeper nature of reality. What's happening in society, I've never really cared about. It's just meaningless. I want to know, yes, okay, this reality exists. I can pick this bottle up and move it from here to here. I can do all of these things, but why? What's the point? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this reality in the way in which we're doing it? What happens when we die? I want to know what's going on. And nothing else really satisfies. So I remember when I was a little child, the first major unresolved trauma that arose for me was the death of my Aunt Helen. So I had a pretty good relationship. I was 3 years old when she died. I had a fond memories of my Aunt Helen. I remember she'd take me to the grocery store with my nan, and she'd put me in the trolley, in like the baby seat, and we'd go to the fruit aisle, and she'd pick fruit off the shelves in secret, making sure no one could see because it's stealing. And she'd give it to me, and she'd just feed me fruit. I really loved it. It was good. It was a good time. Criminal from a very young age. And she died when I was 3 years old. And for me, when I was a little child, like this concept of death was just incomprehensible. I was like, what's going on? Like, I don't understand this. She's gone. Yeah, where did she go? What happens? I remember asking my dad. I remember this very vividly. Where'd Aunt Helen go? Is she coming back? And he said, I don't know. Ask your mum. And she didn't know either. And it turns out no one did. And this plagued me, this phenomenon of death. I spent a lot of time thinking about death. Like, what happens when we die? Like, we just sit in the ground forever? Like, forever? That's a long time. Like, what do we do when we're dead? I just couldn't comprehend it. Still can't to a degree. Like, I don't recall the experience of death. In Buddhism, we believe in reincarnation, but that doesn't mean that, I understand what it feels like. It's still a great mystery to me in a lot of ways. So, and yeah, a number of problems, a number of unresolved traumas in my life, which I could never quite resolve. I could never quite wrap my head around. Things that haunted me all throughout my life. So one of them that I just want to give one example today. Now, one example is all examples in this respect. There's no, the example, they may come in different shapes, different sizes, different forms, but the feeling of suffering, of unresolved trauma, it's the same. So we don't want to say, but mine's worse than yours. Like, it's all the same. Let's not be too dramatic about it. So my relationship with my dad, I want to talk about that. Now, it can be anything, blah, 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 whatever. Whatever the story is, there's the path out, the path through these sort of circumstances, I feel as though is the same. The way to heal, the way to resolve, the way to find closure. So my relationship with my dad was always a very sore point for me. We were born generations apart. He was born in the 40s and I was born in the 90s. And I still am, a very emotional person, very sensitive. And my dad was a very tough man. Back in the 40s in Australia, as a male, you're not allowed to be emotional. You can't let your emotions out. So the way that you deal with things, you just fight people. That's it. You got a problem, you just fight, and that's it. That's all you know. You can't be emotional, because if you show your emotions, you get beaten up. So my dad was he didn't know how to deal with his emotions. He had a lot of emotions, of course, but he had no emotional intelligence. And I feel like as a child, I needed my dad to be there for me in a way in which he just fundamentally was incapable. And that was very difficult for me. I needed my dad. He was there, of course, in every other way. And this was something that I didn't appreciate until later on in my life. But I felt that he wasn't there in the way in which I needed him to be. So we always had a very tense relationship. Things were always at boiling point for us. There was always a lot of conflict. We had a lot of disagreements. It was a very, very difficult and strained relationship. And I always wanted to have a good relationship with my dad. I always wanted to be close with my dad, but I never could. I kept coming back to our relationship throughout my life, with the intellectual perspective, the ego perspective, and just couldn't find a way to get over myself or get over these issues or the ways in which he irritated me and get on with things and find the healing and find the resolution and repair the relationship. So it was a big cause of trauma, a massive cause of trauma for me in my life. So this was one of the reasons that I became a monk, because for me in my life, I want my legacy to be one of healing, love, compassion, kindness, harmony, balance, all of these kind of things. I don't want any unresolved traumas in my life. I don't want any of these shadows, these ghosts haunting me. I don't want to be an angry person and with vengeance or greed or hatred or any of these kind of things. I want to reconcile all of the issues in my life. So But I had no idea how to do that. So as time went on in my life, more of these unresolved traumas would arise, of course. I'm not going to get into all of them, but it just got to the point where I couldn't deal with it anymore, and I made the decision to become a monk. So my relationship with my dad was one of the reasons that I decided to become a monk. I really wanted to, because he's a lot older than I am, and I wanted to make sure that I reconciled my relationship with him before he passed away. I knew that I would live in regret if I wasn't able to do that and heal that relationship. I knew that that would be something that would haunt me, and that's something that, you know, once they're gone, and you can't do anything more. So I thought, this was my mentality from a very early age. I thought, oh, I need to find the way to do this, because I don't think I'll be able to live with myself if I can't, you know, resolve this. It was very, very frustrating. So I became a monk and disconnected from social media, disconnected from everything for the first 7 months. I just went really hardcore, just to go as deep as I could. And in practicing meditation in the way in which I've been talking about, progressively my mind started to become very still and very calm and very peaceful. And I was able to start becoming more objective to myself, starting to take myself less seriously, starting to diminish this delusion of the ego, starting to let go of my attachment to my preferences, to my thoughts, to my identifications, to all of these things, and started to zoom out a little bit and become a little bit more holistic in my perspective, rather than self-centric. So this was the greatest thing that has ever happened to me, because it gave me an opportunity to see things very clearly. Now there's a meditation practice called vipassana, which literally translates to see something in a special way. And I'll talk a bit more about vipassana in a while, but to see something in a special way. And I was starting to see things. I wasn't necessarily practicing, you know, vipassana meditation, but I was starting to see things in a very special way, in a way in which I'd never seen them before. So I believe that in meditation, you know, they say vipassana and samatha, they're mutually exclusive kind of things. But I would say that there's not too much difference between meditation. There are, of course, you know, differences, of course, and people are going to argue about it, but not practicing vipassana, I was seeing things in a very special way. I was starting to gain insight and wisdom. And once we let go of our egos, once we start to still the mind, once we start to train the mind to sit down and shut up, get out of our own way, let go of our attachment to our identities, that's when this wisdom, this multi-dimensional wisdom and insight can start to arise, and we can all start to see things in a very special way. We can start to gain powerful and transformative insight into our lives, which we can use to help move through these things which had previously been insurmountable objects. The brick walls, essentially, can start to disintegrate. And it's like magic. So I could start to see that I was a spoiled little brat. I'd always had these expectations of my dad, you know, and I wanted him to be this, and I wanted him to do things the way in which I wanted to do it, and he was never in alignment with my expectations, and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I was always pointing the finger at him, and in that sense, causing my own suffering. But as a young, immature, ignorant child full of delusions, you don't really know any better. But I was starting to grow in ways in which I'd never grown before. It was unprecedented experience that I was having. And it wasn't as a result of having experience in the physical realm, like, okay, A plus B equals C, or whatever. You go out and you work a job and you gain experience and you know how to do customer service or something like that. It was coming from within me, all of this experience, all of this guidance, all of this, you know, unprecedented kind of information, which was giving me extremely valuable insight and information that I could use to my advantage. And it wasn't necessarily me doing anything. It was kind of beyond me. And I feel like that's the case in meditation. What's happening, this growth, this wisdom that's arising, this insight that's arising, it's beyond your idea of yourself. It's kind of just happening. And it's happening in, you know, your idea of yourselves, best interests, of course. It's helping you to become an alchemist. It can very much so help you to become an alchemist in your life, training you to get out of your own way. So I started to see the ways in which I was getting in my own way, all of my preferences, all of my ideas about my dad, all of my attachments, all of my expectations. And I was starting to see my dad in a very, very different way as well. I always used to say to my dad, oh yeah, Dad, I love you. No, I love you, Dad, but I never meant it. And that hurt me so much because I wanted to mean it. I always wanted to mean it. And I could never say I love you authentically. And that brought me to tears on so many occasions. And I just couldn't work through it. It was so traumatic for me. So practicing meditation over time, I started to soften a lot. And I started to see things from a more holistic kind of perspective. And I was starting to be able to put myself in my dad's shoes very literally. It was very visceral, the way in which I was able to put myself in my dad's shoes and see things from his perspective. I was starting to see that my dad is an imperfect individual. He's got his own suffering, he's got his own traumas, he's got his own experiences, his own unresolved traumas, all of the things that he'd gone through in his life, all of his emotions, all of his regrets, all of his remorse, all of the things that he's never been able to deal with, because you're not allowed to be emotional as a man in Australia in his time. And I thought, oh, that weight that he was carrying, that burden that he was carrying. My dad's dad died when he was 24. My dad had two very traumatic relationships with his first wife, which was not my mother. My mother and my dad were never married, so that was my dad's second relationship. But his first wife, I'm not going to get too much into the details, but they had a very relatively, traumatic relationship, and I won't get too much into it. And then the second relationship, my mum broke my dad's heart, and he never got over it. So he's moving through life as a wounded man in a number of different ways. For men in Australia, you just deal with it. You just get on. You just eat a teaspoon of cement and you harden up, and that's it. But I know that there's emotions raging on within my dad. Of course, his emotions flared up very quickly and very intensely. So I started to see that my dad was a wounded man. And I started to have a great deal of compassion for him. Just being aware of him in the way in which I was, I started to see him in a very, very different way. I started to see that, my dad, he's done absolutely everything for us, everything that he can. He's been the best dad that he possibly can. We always had a roof over our heads. We had a very nice house. We always had food in the cupboards. We always had soft drink, internet, lollies, chips, cable TV. We had everything. My dad bought my sister a horse. He bought me my first car. He bought me a motorized scooter. He did everything that he could for us. He was always there. He loved us in the best way that he could. But here was I, spoiled little brat. That's not enough. You're not this, you're not that. Oh my goodness me. I started to feel so guilty. I started to have a really good, hard look at myself and an evaluation of my own expectations, an evaluation of my own ideas, my own attachments, and started to say, oh, well, that's toxic. That's really unhealthy. Like, oh my goodness me. So I was starting to see myself in a very special way, and I was starting to see my dad in a very special way as well. The experiences that I'd had with my dad were yielding substance that was unprecedented, that I'd never kind of experienced before. So my relationship with my dad started to become very multi-dimensional. The intuition was starting to help me to see things from a much deeper kind of perspective and start to realize how I was getting in the way of the health of this relationship. So I had some serious soul searching to do and some serious accountability to take in that relationship. And I did. So the first 7 months was a process of me just sort of coming to terms with the way in which my contributions to not only my relationship with my dad, I'm just using this one example, but my contributions to my input in a lot of my relationships was contributing towards their unhealthiness or their disintegration. I had a lot of unhealthy relationships, and that all stemmed from my unhealthy relationship with myself. I think it all stems from an unhealthy relationship with ourselves. But once we start to go deep in our meditation, we start to gain the insight. We can start to heal our relationships with others and ourselves at the same time. It can become quite multidimensional. We all want to fix the problems in our lives, but we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to take care of ourselves. We're just looking around like this, like, oh, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm going to try my best, but I'm coming from a place of deep ignorance. And meditation is the way in which we can start to clear this ignorance out of the mind and start to see what the problem is, where it's coming from, what the causes are, and how to pull that root, how to pull that defilement out by the root and throw it away and heal it and get rid of it altogether, completely. So I found that within my relationship with my dad, and it was so easy. I couldn't believe it. So when I was over here in Thailand, we were speaking on, I think it was like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or something. So I still can maintain my relationships. I think I went completely off the grid for about 7 months, yeah. But then after that, I came back on to, when I felt like I'd started to make a bit of progress in my meditation, I came back to WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or something. And, I was in communication with my dad, and it was a progressive healing after I started having these realizations, and the conversations that I had with him were still challenging, of course, but I was finding the way through. And eventually got to the point where my relationship with him just changed. On one phone call, everything was just different. I had shifted on the deepest possible level, and my perceptions of my dad had come into balance. Yes, he still said all those racist and inflammatory kind of things, because, that's just the person that he was. And he always said things that just really irritated me on a very deep level. But, and I'd let that make me angry, and I'd get stuck on that. I was like, oh, you, like, Ugh! I'd hold it against him. But I was finding the way to let go and to resolve and just to accept and just to get over it and just to say, you know what? It's okay, Dad. I forgive you. I love you unconditionally. You can say what you want. You can do what you want. That's who you are. I'm not going to try and change you. I thank you for who you are, for the person that you are, for everything that you've given me, for everything that you've done to me. And these are the sort of things that I started saying to my dad, just out of a deep sense of gratitude and appreciation for who he was, and all of the things that he had done that I'd never appreciated before. I felt so guilty because I'd withheld love from my dad all my life. And the way in which he felt about that, I felt the way in which he felt about that. I knew how much that hurt him. In my meditation, it showed me very clearly, beyond any doubt, the way that my dad felt as a result of my, emotional neglect towards him, based on my inability to give him the love that he deserved. So things changed so quickly, and I remember saying to my dad, oh, I'm sorry for being such a spoiled little brat, something along these lines, for being so ungrateful, for being so unappreciative, and I'm so excited. I'm so excited to, how did I say it, something like this, I don't think I can ever repay the debt of gratitude to you that I owe. I remember saying this to my dad a number of times. I said to him, I'll spend the rest of my life repaying my debt of gratitude towards you for everything that you've done for me. I just felt such a profound sense of true love and appreciation and compassion towards my dad that I'd never felt before. And that relationship was healed, and I couldn't believe it. I remember crying, just crying. I couldn't believe it. It was such a relief to release this burden that I've been carrying for my entire life, and to start to be on good terms with my dad. So he lived in Thailand. He had a life in Thailand, but he was back in Australia, as this was during COVID. So I didn't get to see him during my monkhood. So we were just talking on Facebook and whatnot. So yeah, we healed the relationship. Everything was all good. Our conversations were just easy, and it had never ever been that way before. It had always just been I'd felt this tension, and it was gone. And that unresolved trauma was gone. There was nothing left. It was completely healed. I'd found that resolution, that reconciliation that I wanted my entire life, and it was so easy. Meditation made it so easy. I couldn't believe it. Like, I didn't have to do anything. It just happened. I just got out of my own way, and then the universe, God, nirvana, source, spirit, whatever it is, it cleaned my mind for me. So in meditation, this is what we say in our tradition. If you meditate very well, just cultivate that stillness of the mind, and your mind, it just purifies itself. It's not a matter of you intellectually working your way from A to B. It just happens. Just practice in the right way, and it happens for you. That supportive energy, God, nirvana, source, whatever, it helps you. It clears you. It purifies your mind. It clears the defilements. So we don't have to put such a massive sort of expectation upon our idea of ourselves to do anything. That's another way in which we just get in our own way. And this adds to the idea that we want to make sure that we get out of our own way, because the magnitude, the degree to which we get in our own way is enormous. So we just want to focus on letting go of our ego narrative and trying to do things from like, oh, I'm going to have to do this now, and then I'll have to do that, and then then this happens, and then that happens. Like, whew, that's it's a huge congestion. And to resolve the congestion, we just want to train ourselves just to be very still, and then trust that the right wisdom will arise at the right time, which we can experience for ourselves. I'm 100% confident that each of us can experience this profound, transcendent, transformative wisdom for ourselves if we practice in the right way, which is relevant to each of us as individuals. So the wisdom that I experience specifically may not be the same as what, say, for you experience or you experience. It's completely subjective, but make no mistake that wisdom can come in there at precisely the right time and give you all of the right information, like an instant download, like a lightning bolt. The bandwidth. When we open up the bandwidth of our connection to this supportive entity, it's there, just like that. Just bang. You've got the whole Avengers movie in a second. So I was challenged last year in ways in which I had not been whilst I've been practicing meditation. So it's all good here, sitting in the forest, practicing meditation, no problems arising. We're in a very isolated and secluded kind of space. We're away from all of the problems, so you've got a bit of a buffer zone. You can just focus on doing your thing. You don't have to worry about working a job or paying taxes or blah, 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 or any of these things. So it's the ideal environment. So I had the ideal environment to practice in for 2.5 years. So last year, the seas became very, very rough for me. Some big storms came along, and it was a big test to see how well I had built my ship in meditation. So I had no idea how strong my ship was. But last year, my dad died. It was actually, hold on, what's the date today? Today's the 5th? He died yesterday, last year. So it's been 1 year since he passed away. So I didn't get to see my dad in this phase of my life as a monk. He was stuck in Australia. We were only speaking on Facebook Messenger, on WhatsApp and whatnot. So I didn't get to make up for lost time with my dad. It was something that I was so excited about after we'd repaired our relationship. I really wanted to spend some more time with him and make the most of our relationship, because I feel like, you know, there was so much lost time there. So I didn't get to say goodbye to my dad. I had so many reasons to suffer as a result of this experience. So he died last year. He had cancer. It couldn't be diagnosed. It had mutated so aggressively, and it killed him very, very quickly. So he was a 2-pack a day smoker for most of his life, and an alcoholic as well. So not necessarily really taking care of his health, but he'd never been sick at all throughout his life. I'd never seen my dad unwell, or if he was unwell, he wouldn't let you know about it because he was just tough as nails. But it all came out at the end to hit him really, really hard. So yeah, it was lung cancer, and he deteriorated very, very quickly. So they put him on antibiotics, and nothing helped, of course, because it was cancer. And we weren't sure how serious it was because they couldn't diagnose it properly. And you know, you never know how much time you've got. We always think we've got more time. No one's expecting death. Death can come at any moment. So he called me one day, and I'd never seen him crying before, and he was in tears. He was just in agonizing pain. He hadn't slept, just excruciating pain, unendurable pain. It's just so intense and it wouldn't go away. And my dad was crying, and it broke my heart to see him like that. The toughest man that I'd ever known, just sobbing, just crying. I'd never seen him like that before. It was a brand new experience for me, and I was in shock. It really hurt me to see him like that, and I thought, okay, I need to get home. So he kept saying, as he was getting sicker and sicker, he kept saying, oh, I'm dead, I'm going to die. Look, there's no way you recover from something like this. And he knew what was up. He knew he was going to die. And everyone in the family, all of his friends were like, oh, you're a hypochondriac. Like, it's not, you'll be fine. But I felt like, oh, he knows what's happening. Yeah, it's very serious. And I kept saying to my brothers, get me a ticket home. Like, I'm like, oh no, we don't know what it is yet. I was like, oh God. So eventually he called me, and he was in tears, and I called my brother and I said, book me a ticket home. Like, just book me a ticket home. I need to come home. So it was yesterday, last year, that I got a call from my brother. I was supposed to go home on the 4th of July last year to go back and look after my dad. And I got a call in the morning that I was supposed to fly home from my brother to say that he'd passed away during the night. And I was just devastated. It just hit me so hard. I was just in shock. I couldn't believe it. You know, someone that had been there for my entire life, my dad, it just gone. And to reconcile this experience, it was quite overwhelming. Quite a devastating impact. So I still went home, of course, and I was crying, of course. I'm not going to deny my emotions, and I think that's important in meditation. We don't want to deny our emotions. Allow your emotions to just express themselves. Don't try and suppress your emotions. We want these emotions to fully express themselves. If we're resisting experience, resisting the emotions, then they can't give us the full experience that they've arisen to give us, I suppose. And there's valuable wisdom, there's valuable lessons that will arise if you allow your emotions to fully express themselves, to not hold them at bay, to not try, oh, I don't want to cry. No, if you let these things arise and just express themselves fully, there's often a silver lining. Once they've fully expressed themselves and there's nothing left, the wisdom can start to arise, the insight can start to arise. We can start to see things more clearly, but we can't when we're creating attachment or aversion in the mind, when we're resisting reality. When we're resisting our experiences, we're operating on a very narrow bandwidth, and we're not getting all of the pictures of the jigsaw puzzle. We're only getting maybe 50% of the pieces because we're not willing to experience that experience. We're holding it away from us. And we want to experience our experience. We want to get the full experience. That's when we have the most to gain, when we allow ourselves to go through the full experience, which can be scary because we don't want to feel sad. We don't want to feel angry. We don't want to feel all of those uncomfortable emotions. But learning how to deal with these uncomfortable emotions is a superpower, and it's important that we expose ourselves to them fully, completely, as scary and as frightening as that might be. You know, It doesn't last forever. The emotions will pass, they will go away. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. So don't be afraid just to let it express itself. It's not going to be forever. It's going to go away. It's okay. So I'm not afraid to express my emotions. I've never been afraid to express my emotions. I've just been very stagnant, very stuck. A lot of unresolved traumas, and you get congested. But I was progressively removing these congestions, I suppose. And the death of your parent like that, that's something that, you're going to cry about. So I did. I cried. I bawled my eyes out. I went back to Australia, and I was just in acceptance mode. So for me personally in my life, I'd never been able to deal with a traumatic experience. I'd never been able to fully work through or resolve anything. I had so many unresolved traumas. I was paralyzed. I was moving through life as just a shell of a person, just like, oh my God, there's just so much stuff like I just have no idea how to deal with. And practicing meditation has helped me to move through that build-up of unresolved traumas and equipped me with the skill to be able to deal with these heavy-hitting impacts when they hit you, well, when they hit me. So I went back to Australia and I was just in acceptance mode. So acceptance, 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 just being objective, being detached, being very neutral, not reacting, not saying, oh, my dad's died, like, oh no, I'm never going to see him again, I'm never going to get to say goodbye to him, oh no, poor me, I'm a victim. That was not the mentality that I was taking for this situation. I was just in this mode of like acceptance. Okay, my dad's died. I'm not going to get to see him again. I'm not going to get to say goodbye. We're not going to get to make up for lost time. Like, wow. That's the way it is. And I was just dealing with it. Just in the moment, just dealing with it. And for me, this is what acceptance looked like. I was at my dad's house, just sitting on the couch, for days, just like this, like, oh my God, just like this. That's what acceptance looked like. It was ugly, It wasn't a beautiful process. It's not rainbows and butterflies. It's going to be messy, It's not going to be delightful, and that's okay. Just let it be what it is. Don't judge it. Don't expect anything. I would highly recommend when these experiences arise, if you want to work through these things, if you don't want these things to become unresolved trauma, if you want to heal yourself, if you want to help yourself, you don't want these things to take root, right? So the best thing that you can do for yourself is to learn to accept it, to train yourself to accept and to not focus on the dog. So I see so many people suffering needlessly in their lives because they don't know how to heal themselves. They don't recognize the importance and the necessity of acceptance. They're too afraid to accept, and to your own detriment. If you can't accept these things, you will inherit suffering as a result of that. And once again, you can argue with it all you want, but suffering will come to you. So acceptance is the way through, as difficult as that might be. So the best thing we can do for ourselves right off the bat, as difficult as it might be, this is my own experience, this is what I've learned through my own experience, is to just, okay, all right, let's deal with it. Let's just deal with it. And that was my intention. I was not going to let this thing take root as unresolved trauma, as so many other things in my life had done. I was not willing to move through life like that anymore. I was not willing to move through life as a wounded individual, as a suffering individual, not willing to tolerate that in my life anymore, because I recognized that suffering was unnecessary. So I thought, okay, it hurts, it's hard, it's difficult. I don't want this to be the case. I want my dad to be here. I want to make up for lost time. I want to spend some time. I want him to see me as a monk. All of these kind of things. But he's dead. He's not coming back. I can't say goodbye to him. It didn't go the way that I wanted it to. And I have to deal with that because that's what has happened. Those are the cards that I've been dealt. I can't argue with that. I can't change that. These things that we go through in our lives that we don't want to happen, they've happened. You can't change them. So don't resist it. You're punishing yourself. I was through my life punishing myself. I was ignorant, of course, but when I learned how to meditate, I thought, I'm not doing that anymore. No way. So I thought, all right. And the emotions would arise, of course, like, my God, it's so heavy. Painful. All these emotions would arise, but I'd let it go and get back to my meditation, like, And it was so difficult because I wanted to be with the emotions. They were very, very powerful. So it took a lot of presence of mind and a lot of willpower to be like, okay, samma arahang, oh God, samma arahang, and just ground myself and to keep myself stable, to keep myself present, to keep myself balanced on that platform of mindfulness, so that when those difficult emotions did arise, my wisdom, I had the space within myself. When I was grounded, when I was balanced, when I was harmonious, I had a very open bandwidth to the connection, to my connection rather, with that transcendental object at the end of time, towards that, to the wisdom, to the insight. So practicing meditation, just keeping my mind as still and objective as possible. The difficulties would arise, but then the wisdom would come up and reassure me and say, it's okay. Nothing lasts forever. It's okay. I'm paraphrasing, of course. There was a lot of other wisdom and insight which arose, which I'm not going to get into because we are limited on time. I don't want to get into it in too much detail, and I can't remember most of it, to be honest. But there was this reassurance that came up and just let me know that it's okay. It was like extinguishing the flames of suffering. You know, all of the suffering would arise. Dad's dead, like, all of this stuff, like, trying to take over my mind. But I was not allowing that to happen. Well, my wisdom, rather, was not allowing that to happen. Through meditating in the right way, I was making sure that none of these defilements, none of this suffering could take root and poison my mind and corrupt my mind. So the wisdom would come up to balance and say, okay, yes, Dad's dead. Yes, this, yes, that. But it's okay. So rather than having this imbalanced perspective of pain and suffering, the wisdom and insight was bringing me back into balance to help me to be like, okay, I've got this. I've got it. It's all good. It's fine. And slowly and steadily and progressively, I was starting to find my composure through this circumstance to reassure myself, you know what? It's okay. I've got it. And the suffering, the traumas would arise, and they became less and less powerful over time. I started to be able to move through these things very easily. The same things would arise, but they just became less and less powerful. I was starting to feel like, I've got this. You know what? It's fine. I've got it. Until there was no pain, no trauma, no suffering. And this happened very, very quickly, that I felt on top of this situation. And there was no coping mechanisms or anything like that. It was just me and the trauma, me and the suffering, me and this experience. I had no option other than to just deal with it and to face it. And I did. And I learned how to move through it. And I was surprised. I was looking around, I was like, is that it? That's it? It's all gone? But I felt within myself that there was nothing unresolved, that I had observed everything as objectively as I possibly could related to the death of my father and resolved it comprehensively. To the point where I was in the clear, and I was very, very surprised. I couldn't believe it. I'd never been able to move through anything in my life before, and I'd processed the death of my dad. It was within the space of a month. I got COVID as well. I got off the plane, came back to Melbourne, got off the plane, and the next day I had COVID, and I was sick for about 6 weeks. But I was in the clear after that experience with my dad very, very quickly. And now, once again, I just want to touch on the fact that I know so many people get stuck with these kind of things, and it's not necessary. And it's not saying that you're a sociopath to get over it very quickly or anything like that, or that there's no emotions or anything like that. But it's just an unwillingness to tolerate suffering for any longer than it needs to be there. And so many of us, we prolong the suffering unnecessarily based on our ignorance of the path to heal, of our unknowingness, I suppose, of how to help ourselves. But when we practice meditation, it's like connecting with the divine help. We can connect with this very, very powerful and transformative entity, whatever it is, that can give us the wisdom that we need, the clarity that we need to heal ourselves, to move through these things, and to get on with our lives. Because to be stuck on things like this, whilst we might identify with it a lot, we're holding ourselves back in life. We're not able to realize our full potential if we're so stagnant, if we're so caught up on all of this massive unresolved traumas. So in my life, I see that in life in general, rather, I see that most of us, if not all of us, we're going through a battle. I'd call it the battle of two wolves. And I feel like this battle is going on within each and every one of us. So there's two wolves fighting for supremacy. Only one wolf can win. So there's the negative wolf, who's full of anger, depression, anxiety, fear, frustration, pride, guilt, shame, depression, all of these things, the negative stuff, the things that we would define as negative, the things that we don't want. And then there's the good wolf, who's full of love, healing, harmony, balance, compassion, kindness, acceptance, resolution, all of the good things, all the things that we want, tranquility, bliss, you name it. And they're fighting all the time in the mind. Now, which wolf wins? Well, which wolf do we want to win? We want the good wolf to win, right? Does anyone want the bad wolf to win? All right, good. We want the good wolf to win. But which wolf does win? It's the wolf that you feed. And so often we get caught up into feeding the negative wolf, the bad wolf. And this is a habit. This is a really bad habit, but it's ingrained into us from a very early age. We're indoctrinated by the habit of feeding into the negativity through society's indoctrination, I would say, for the most part, is how we've been cultured. So in capitalistic consumerism, nothing is ever enough. You know, we always beat ourselves up. Oh, I'm not good enough. I won't be happy until I have this. We're operating from a scarcity mentality, which is inherently negative. Nothing is ever substantial. Nothing is ever good enough. We always want more. The best number is more. I can never be satisfied with what I have. And therefore, you know, we feed into the negativity, perpetuating this cycle. So the negatives in our lives have all of the energy. We feed into the depression, we feed into the anger, we identify with it all when it arises. We give it the energy that it needs to survive. So we say that we don't want these things. We don't want to be unhappy, we don't want to be depressed, we don't want to be suicidal, we don't want. But we're giving it the energy that it needs to perpetuate itself. By saying that you don't want something, it's not actually saying that you don't want something. On a universal level, by saying that you don't want something, you're creating aversion. You're actually giving what you don't want the energy that it needs to survive by giving it your attention. So you've got to be very careful about where you place your attention, as your attention is your most valuable currency. If you want to manifest anything, just give it your attention and it'll grow, because what you give your attention to will grow. If you give your attention to the anger, you become more angry. If you give your attention to the depression, to the sadness, you become more depressed and sad. If you give your energy and attention to the fear, you become more fearful. The only thing to fear is fear itself. And we get caught, the cycle of fear, you know, a little bit of fear comes up in the mind and then you react to it like, oh, fear. And then you start, it expands, it explodes. You just get caught up in this enormous cycle of fear. And then all of a sudden that fear is infinitely bigger than it was when it first started, because you've been feeding it the energy and it snowballs and it becomes this mass that takes over your mind. So we can become our own best friend or our own worst enemy, depending on where we place our attention. But we're so indoctrinated into attending to the negative, keeping ourselves trapped in suffering, in these cycles of suffering. And, you know, we don't even realize that this is what's happening. But I'm pretty sure that after this brief explanation that it's become quite clear as to just how powerful your attention can actually be. As I'm sure that we can all realize to a greater or lesser extent the ways in which we've energized our own suffering in our lives based on what's just been mentioned. And if we meditate on it for a little while or contemplate what I've just mentioned for a little while, I'm sure that you'll all see that this is exactly true. So how do we make a shift in our lives? It's just about being mindful as to where you place your attention and recognizing that, oh, if I place my attention on the negative, then I get into a really bad mood. I get into a rut. If you're placing your energy on the negative, you know, it's a slippery slope downhill. And before you know it, you're at the bottom. You're in Sufferingville, population U. So what can we do for ourselves? It's very simple. I bet you can all guess what I'm about to say. Practice meditation. So we want to practice just shifting from the negative to the positive. And how we do so, how do you feed the positive wolf? We want to give all of the energy to the positive wolf. We don't want to give any energy to the negative wolf. We want to kill the negative wolf. We want, the negative wolf is all of the defilements. We want to make sure that it has no energy. Because when that negative wolf has no energy, which is your attention, it just dies. It just fades away. And when the negative wolf fades away, this is when we can start finding the clarity, the resolution, because we're trying to work through all of the anger, the depression, by feeding it. Oh, I don't want it, like, oh no, from the intellectual perspective, not knowing that we're asking for more of it all the while. So what we want to do is just cut off the energy supply so that it can just complete itself. And it will. These things, we don't need to resist them, just let it go, don't feed it anymore, and it'll fizzle out, it'll lose its energy, it'll lose its hold, and when it fully expresses itself, which it eventually will do when you stop resisting it, it'll fully express itself, then you can start gaining that clarifying wisdom or insight into the deep nature of the issue, where it came from, how to resolve it. You can gain a broader perspective on the issue quite comprehensively to be able to move through the issue beyond return and not create any suffering for yourselves. But that's the trick, because we're also habituated into feeding into it. So we've got to be very careful, recognize, oh, okay, this is something that I generally react to. I now know that reacting is not in my best interests. I now know that feeding this entity is not in my best interests, because I just keep myself stuck in cycles. Very easy to observe. If you take a moment, if you haven't already, just take a moment to contemplate this for yourself, and you'll see the cycle, how it unfolds. A bit of meditation can go a long way in that respect. So we want to just practice how we feed the good wolf is stillness. That's it. Very simple. Practice meditation. Samma arahang, samma arahang. Just train yourself, knowing that every time, every moment that you spend practicing well with the right effort in meditation is giving food to the good wolf. Have faith in this. Trust in this. You might not be able to see it. You might not be able to comprehend it. That's what's happening for some time, but that's what's happening. Similar in bodybuilding, you can't see the gains. You might go to the gym for 6 weeks before you notice anything happening. It doesn't mean that nothing was happening. It's just that it was happening on very subtle levels and took time to build up. Same in meditation. It's happening, and it's going to get to that point where it'll get to that turning point, and you'll be surprised. You'll recognize, oh, all of the effort that I'd put in was leading up to this happening, and this wouldn't have happened without having put all of that effort in. So don't underestimate a single moment that you can spend in meditation and the value that it can bring your life in the ways in which it can help you to transform and transcend suffering. Such profound stuff, it really is, but we've got to be willing to give it a chance. So just keep feeding that good wolf. Trust the process, give your energy to the positives, rejoice in your merits as well. Every time you do something good, be proud of yourself. So often we get caught up beating ourselves up. I'm not good enough, I hate myself, blah this, blah that, oh wow, wow, wow. You know, beating ourselves up and focusing on the negative, that negative internal talk. And we're all guilty of it, absolutely. There's no judgment there, of course, that's the way it is. We want to break that habit and let go of this negative self-narrative and start building ourselves up from within and rejoicing in our merits. Start congratulating ourselves and feeling proud of the goodness that we do. Congratulating ourselves on our merits, on all of our good qualities. Oh, I'm a very kind person. I'm a very generous person. I like to help out my friends. That's something that I'm really proud of. Not in an arrogant or an egotistical way, like, oh, look at me, I do this for everyone else and I'm so important. But just like you know what, I deserve to feel proud of how good of a person I am. Not that I'm better or worse than anyone else, but that's how we can cultivate a good and a healthy relationship with ourselves, by feeding the good wolf and learning how to rejoice in our merits, learning how to take care of ourselves, learning how to give ourselves what we need for our own holistic well-being. You know, knowing how to take care of ourselves. There's so many different facets to taking care of ourselves, and meditation can show us the way in which we can comprehensively take care of ourselves and learn how to develop a healthy relationship with ourselves. It's very subjective. It's going to be different for everyone. We can talk about it a little bit more later if anyone has any questions about this. I have a perspective on this, of course. I'm not going to get into it too much now. But you're getting down to the relationship with ourself. We've got to let go of the negative self-talk. We've got to transcend this Windows 97 kind of paradigm of negativity, of self-negativity, and learn how to take care of ourselves in this sense. So the transformation is multifaceted, multidimensional. There's so many things to it. So I'll elaborate a little bit more on healing. So I've spoken a little bit about how meditation can help us to heal the unresolved traumas and to also deal with the difficult emotions when they arise, of course. We've got to have the perspective of acceptance. If we're in denial, then that thing, whatever it is, will cast a shadow over your life. I promise you. So once again, last year I was tested in ways in which I would never have expected. So I was in Australia for about 4 months, and it came time to come back to Thailand. So I came back to Thailand on October 28 last year, and I'd been back here at Pa Pae for maybe no more than a couple of hours, and I got a call from my ex-girlfriend to tell me that one of my best friends had just committed suicide. And I was like, what? Are you serious? I couldn't believe it. I actually couldn't believe it, and I didn't believe it. I was in shock. That's something that you just don't expect. But this is one of my best friends, someone who I'd known since primary school. We'd only been really close for the last maybe 7 or 8 years, but we had plans together. We were planning on building a meditation retreat / self-sustainable community back in Australia, as we were both equally dissatisfied with participating in society. We were both very unhappy. Our participation in society was, against our will. We thought, okay, we need to do something. We need to find a better way. So we had all these plans and blah, 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 and all of the rest of it. So one of my closest friends, and he was struggling with his mental health in a very similar way to me, obviously more because he committed suicide, but very, very traumatized. And So I knew that he was dealing with his mental health issues just as I was, and during the time that I'd been a monk, I feel like for me personally, the best way that I can help someone is to plant a seed. I never ever want to try and take someone's free will away from them or make their decision for them or force them to a conclusion. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I feel like there's only so much you can do for a person, but ultimately they must make their own decisions. And I will never ever stand over someone, ever. I refuse. So when I was back in Australia, he came and stayed with me, and throughout the course of the last couple of years, I'd had a couple of conversations with him and told him about how being a monk was the best thing that I'd ever done. And I thought, hey, you know what? This could be really good for you, just have some time and space to work through some of these things. And just opening him up to the idea, giving him something to think about. And he did think about it. So in Australia, he came and stayed with me, and I said, oh, have you thought about becoming a monk? Put that out there. And he's like, yeah, actually, I've really been thinking about it. And I was like, oh, amazing. Great. So I watered that seed a little bit. So that seed that I'd planted in his mind, he'd been thinking about it, which is good. So I gave it a little bit more water, which is all I can do. Just feed it a little bit, talk it up a little bit, say, oh, it'd be amazing, blah, blah, blah. And then it came to, it was around a few days before I came back to Thailand, and he gave me a call. And he said, I've decided I'm going to become a monk. And I was surprised. I wasn't expecting him to make that decision. I thought, oh, he's too attached. He's got too much attachment to all of the things, So I was like, oh, I didn't expect anything. But he called me and I was really surprised. And he said, I'm going to become a monk. And I was like, amazing. Oh, that's going to be so cool. We can be monks together. It's going to be great. So we had a plan. I said, okay, you need to get your passport sorted out. You need a visa. And I just received an inheritance from my dad. And I knew that he didn't have money. So I said, anything you need, I've got money. I'll help with your plane ticket. Like, I don't care. Just get here. I just didn't care. So I let him know that there was a path, a safe and secure path for him to take. So he didn't have anything to worry about. I was like, just get these things done, it'll be good. So I stopped worrying about him, came back over to Thailand, and then I got the call from my ex-girlfriend, and I was shocked, and I was like, I literally spoke with him a couple of days ago, and he was coming here to become a monk. So I just couldn't process it in that moment. I was like, oh, surely not. But something within me knew, something deep within me knew that he'd committed suicide. I was like, oh, I could just feel it. I just didn't want to accept it though. So it became very real for me a couple of days later when the funeral notice went out on Facebook. That's when it kind of I still really didn't want to accept it though. I was like, oh my goodness me. And then it hit home on the day of the funeral. I watched the funeral via live stream, and just seeing all of his family and friends in the chapel just bawling their eyes out. It was so fresh. Such a bright spark. Someone that everybody loved so much had just committed suicide, and everyone was just beside themselves. And at that point, I just lost it. I completely lost it, and I bawled my eyes out. I was overwhelmed by my emotions. So much emotion poured out of me. It was. I had the two of the most difficult days of my life at that point in time. I thought, oh my God, this is it. This is the end. How am I ever going to get over this? Oh my goodness me. Suicide hits different than just death, and I'm sure a lot of us have been, or maybe some of us here have been touched by suicide. It just hits differently. Someone just choosing to take their life like that. Especially after we'd had a good conversation. There was a lot of guilt that I was going through. I was like, could I have done more for him? Could I have been a better friend? What did I do wrong? I took so much blame. I felt like I was responsible. I could have done more. I could have stayed in Australia and made sure that he was safe before we came back over. And I was just beating myself up a lot. And it was a very, very overwhelming period of time, and all of this craziness was going on within me. But I just kept bringing it back to my meditation. I did not let myself get too far away from my center. I was like, I need to come back to my center here. So I did. I just got back to my meditation, and I just processed it. I just accepted it. I just dealt with it. I just looked at it. I was like, okay, he's dead. There's no denying it now. He's gone. He's not coming back. He's not coming here to become a monk. We're not going to build a sustainable community together. He's gone. He's gone. So I had two of the roughest days of my life, and then on the third day, I was completely clear. For me, that was a more devastating impact than my dad. That hit me harder than my dad's death. It just knocked me on my butt. It was so crazy and so intense, and I processed that situation within 2 days. I was so shocked, so surprised. I was literally just like, is that it? Are you serious? It's all done. It's all gone. After the 2 days, and there's been no unresolved trauma that's come up from that point in time to say, haha, I'm still here. It was done, it was gone. I was completely at peace with that situation within 2 days. I'd accepted it within 2 days, Once again, all of the stuff would come up like, he's gone, he's killed himself, like crazy. But then the wisdom would come up and said, that was his choice. You know, could I have done more for him? Was I a good friend? Like, you did everything that you could for him. You were the best friend that you could possibly be. You know, you offered him an opportunity to help himself, and he's chosen to take his own life. There's nothing more that you could have done. Okay, all right, I accept it. I just accepted his choice. I accepted the fact, okay, this is what happened. My wisdom, my intuition helped me to come to an acceptance that I probably would not have been able to come to without the skill of meditation. And that's the thing, a lot of us can't come to this acceptance that we need to come to gain the closure and the resolution in our lives. We just can't accept it. We don't have the wisdom, we don't have the angles, we don't have the insight, we don't have all of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that we need. We don't have the bandwidth to process these heavy experiences. The intellect, it's too narrow of a bandwidth to process these heavy experiences, and that's why we all get stuck. But if we start practicing meditation, we can steadily open up the bandwidth of our connection to that transformative mechanism, which can help to give us the insight and the wisdom that we need to process these things, that we would not be able to process otherwise. It's impossible, almost. I went through my life the most intellectual person, you know, so intelligent. Didn't help me though. Didn't help me in the ways that were most important. My analytical and intellectual prowess were useless when it came to the issues of the heart, and I wanted to kill myself because of my inability to deal with all of these challenges that I experienced in my life. Didn't matter how smart I was. Didn't matter how big my ego was. Like, I still didn't want to be alive. I was still suffering so much. It didn't help me at all. But practicing meditation has given me a new lease on life, completely, changed things completely. I feel like there's nothing that I can't deal with. You know, throw anything my way, I will deal with it. It might take me a day, it might take me a week. I know I'll get through it though. I'm not going to get stuck. There's no way. I know that I will know exactly what I need to know, exactly when I need to know it, beyond any doubt. No doubt in my mind. I know that that wisdom will come. I trust myself. I have complete faith in my ability, not my ability, but, you know, in my relative terms, in my ability to process anything. I know that that wisdom will come and that there's nothing that I can't deal with. I'm so confident in that fact. So I move through life very confident. I have no more anxiety, no more depression, none of these mental illnesses. I've healed all of these things. It's a comprehensive, multidimensional resolution in meditation to any problem that you might be experiencing in your life. I am very confident. I would say almost 100%. There might be some exceptions, I'm not too sure. Probably not though. That anyone can practice in the same way and find the resolutions that they haven't been able to find to the problems that they've been experiencing in their lives in whichever form they come.